John, we have a segment on this show sometimes we call Instant Karma, which is where we see some crazy character has done something or other, and a moment later it catches up with them. This is a case of delayed karma, where remember all that during BLM, all those people taking the knee to BLM, including amongst them were some FBI agents. Well, it now turns out the FBI has now decided to fire those agents who were photographed during the protests in Washington that followed the 2020 death of George Floyd. So it took a while, but there they are, kneeling at this kind of... That was a weird period, John, all that kneeling stuff. But they've now been sacked. Not before time, I would have thought, John.
Rowan, some people may wonder, why exactly should they be fired for participating in these George Floyd demonstrations back in 2020? And the answer is that the entire point of those protests was to claim that American law enforcement is racist. That was the entire idea. Yeah. In fact, George Floyd was a career criminal who had a 3 times lethal dose of fentanyl in his system when he died. Race had nothing to do with that incident. It is reasonable to expect that FBI agents are going to be pro-law enforcement, not anti-law enforcement, and not sign on to this myth that American law enforcement is this terrible racist institution. And that's what they were doing by kneeling and participating in those protests.
Freedom. And meanwhile, we've got Kamala Harris, who was, let's not forget, raising bail money for some of these lawless thugs who were rioting back in 2020. She's on a book tour, John, and she is just saying the most insane things. She's calling Donald Trump a communist dictator, an emperor, and she's claiming, without being challenged, that her election that she participated in was the closest in the 21st century, that she came within a whisker of winning. Can you just fact check for that for us, please? Because none of the people she has sat down with, from Rachel Maddow to the ladies of The View, corrected her when she said this.
Well, Kamala Harris lives in her own world. She really does. And sometimes she has kind of a hard time explaining that world to the rest of us. It's not always very coherent. No, it was not the closest election in the 21st century or any other century. Well, I think the good news here, Rita, is Kamala Harris is not fooling anyone. I mean, she and Joe Biden are both people that the Democratic Party just wants to hustle off the stage. Her campaign, her race was an embarrassment. Frankly, her tenure as vice president was an embarrassment. And the whole scandal of Joe Biden, who was nowhere near competent to execute the duties of his office, I think, for the whole 4-year term. And the Democrats just want to leave that entire era behind them. And as far as they're concerned, Kamala Harris's book tour cannot end soon enough.
James.
Hey, John, just before we let you go, I want to ask you about this other story, which is fascinating to me because I'm not quite sure how to feel about it, but TikTok apparently is going to live to see another day in the United States. And apparently China has signed a deal with the Trump administration. There's going to be a consortium of buyers, I think, coming in on this. Americans will be able to use it, but it sounds like China won't have as much sort of control over the algorithm or the information that they harvest. Tell us about this. Is this a good deal?
This is a good news story, James. TikTok goes American. Congress passed a law that would shut TikTok down in the United States unless it was transferred to non-Chinese ownership, and there were good reasons for that. The algorithm was promoting anti-American content. There were national security concerns about the data collection that was going on. And what Trump's executive order did was to certify that the deal that is now being done complies with the law that Congress passed. And what's happening is that there's going to be an American version of TikTok available here, which is going to be majority owned by American companies, including Oracle. It's going to be headquartered in the United States. And I think this is a great result. Young people like TikTok, and they're going to be able to continue having access to TikTok, but without that pernicious influence of the Chinese Communist Party.